My name is Annick Masselot, and originally I'm a European lawyer. Well, I came from Europe, as you can hear from my accent. I've worked with the European Commission, the European Union. I've done a lot of work on gender equality and pregnancy and maternity rights and work-life reconciliation with the European Union, drafting legislation, these kind of things. And then, well, love took me to New Zealand. As all good feminists, I followed my husband to New Zealand. And there we are. I'm now here, where I'm doing New Zealand law, as well as still some European law and some other law. But I'm still interested in the area of work-life reconciliation, work-life balance. And I'm still working in those kind of areas. So this is on the basis of that kind of expertise that I'm giving this lecture. So the question is, and also before we start, I should tell you that I am not going to provide any solution to any of your problems. So if you're here to get any solution, please, you can leave, because this is not going to help at all. But here we go. That's it. This is the question tonight. What if women could balance work and family responsibility? So of course, this is ringing a lot of concern with me, and it highlights all my concern, and it's about balancing. So when in New Zealand we're talking about balancing, this is it. By the way, do not do that with your children. That's dangerous, and it's probably not allowed under New Zealand law. Balancing is something that is quite interesting. In Europe, the European Union, we're talking about reconciliation, and I talk about that in a way that means that this is the need to spend less time at work in order to take care of the family. So that's reconciliation. Balancing or work-life balance is the desire to spend less time at work in order to develop other interests. That could be further education, that could be gardening, that could be all sorts of things. But the overall aim is to contributing to the well-being of the individual. So the two concepts are quite different. And so when I talk about them, I'm really making a difference in my head. And in New Zealand, the legislation, the framework, is all based over work-life balance and not work-life reconciliation. This is really important also because the two concepts are gendered. It is women that provide care for free, mostly. Generally, I mean, there are men that provide care, of course, but in general, it is women that provide this care. And so therefore, this idea of balancing or reconciling is quite important in terms of who's doing it. So that's about balancing. About the other part is about women. So can women reconcile, balance work and life together? So we're looking at women. Why do we look at women? I mean, obviously we're making immediately this assumption that women are mothers, women are carers, and so that rings to me a lot of. This brings my life into the forefront immediately, and this big concept of the good mother and the good father. So my husband and I, we have children. He's at home at the moment looking after the children while I'm giving this lovely lecture. Thank you for him to do that job, but I do it as well. I've been away for traveling for work recently, and it's quite interesting that when I'm away, a lot of people offer him to help. Can I help you with the children? And people email me and tell me how he's doing so great with the children. He's so amazing. In fact, recently I was talking to a friend of mine in Glasgow who went shopping with his daughter for new shoes, and the neighbor stopped him and said, "You went shopping for shoes with your daughter?" Like it was an impossible task. How could a man go shopping for shoes for his daughter? This sounds really quite impossible. So a great father, obviously, he went shopping for shoes. My husband is looking after the children. They're still alive. So that's fabulous. When my husband goes away for his work, no one gives any, no one asks for help. Do you want help? No one says that. But I get concerned. People ask me, it must be so hard for him, He is so far away from his children. He must miss them so much. So I feel, you know, the concept of good mother and good fathers are quite different. What we understand with those concepts are quite different altogether. And so this balancing act that we are requiring of mothers, not really of fathers. And so hopefully during this lecture I can challenge a little bit of our accepted gender stereotypes and maybe, you know, poke a little bit at what we understand to be the normal way. But enough about that, and first we should celebrate what is good about New Zealand. New Zealand has a strong reputation for gender equality. And it's not just a reputation, but it's, you know, there are lots of good things that have happened here or are happening here. New Zealand was the first country to give the right to vote to women in 1893. And I say give the right to vote, or women took the right to vote, or, you know, it's difficult to frame it in a way that that doesn't say that women were given something. They were entitled to it from the start. But New Zealand was the first country nonetheless. We've had women in high office. We've had 2 prime ministers that were female. We still have the Chief Justice, Dame Sain Elias, who's a woman. We've had Margaret Wilson as the Speaker of the House, and we've had 2 female Governor General. So we've had women in high office in New Zealand, and we have to celebrate that. It's not in all countries that this happens. In fact, I come from France. We've never had a French president that was female. So this is something to celebrate. So we've got some leadership in making law, in changing law, and globally we have some standing, and also within the country we've had some female leadership. Also in terms of on the global level, New Zealand is scoring really high. In 2013, last year, the global gender gap put New Zealand at the 7th place out of 136 countries, just after the Scandinavian country. And on the Human Development Index, New Zealand scored 5th out of 187 countries. So this is really good. We're right up there with the Scandinavian country, or just after the Scandinavian country. And it's quite interesting because the Scandinavian countries have very different economic and social system to New Zealand. So what this tells us is that gender equality does not have to belong to one particular system or another, but it can be part of all sorts of systems. More positivity here, more strong indicator that New Zealand has a strong record in gender equality. In fact, for women, the best way out of economic independence is through earning an income, to participating into the labor market. So paid work is very important for women, for them to get out of poverty, but also for their children, because there is still this link between women and caring, and so therefore it's very important for women to earn an income. But it's also important for New Zealand because of the system in which we're working, where growth is important. New Zealand are participating in, women are participating in the labor market in New Zealand in very high level. New Zealand has one of the highest employment rates for women out of all of the OECD countries. At the moment, the labor force participation for women is 63.7%, and that's from March of this year. And men's participation is higher, 74.9%, almost 75%. The employment rate is higher for women than it is for men, but it's still relatively low compared to other countries. It's 6.4% for women and 5.6% for men. This unemployment rate is higher for Maori and Pacifica women, and you know, across when you're looking not just at gender, but when you're looking at ethnic background, it also varies across the board. In terms of the gender pay gap, New Zealand has one of the lowest gender pay gap in the whole world. Definitely the lowest in Asia Pacific, 10.1%. When we're looking at full-time employment. So should we celebrate that? well, it's still 10% less than what, you still get 10% less than what you would get if you were a man. So it's good because it's a relatively low gender pay gap, and it's reducing. So it's a good indicator. Also, in terms of education, women are outperforming men in education across the board. At university, about 64% of women, 64% of graduates are women, and this is just at university, but across the board they are overperforming compared to outperforming men in all education. And to top it up, the fertility rates in New Zealand are at replacement level. So what can we ask? It's perfect, isn't it? This is consistent, the fertility rate is consistent with what we know of other countries. So it's counterintuitive that when women have a high employment rate, they will have a high fertility rate. So it's not necessarily when women work less, then they have more children. At least in developed or industrialized country, it works together. High level of employment goes with high fertility rate. And yet, despite all this paradise picture, we do still have some quite serious sexism going on. This is just one of the things that happened this year. But every year, every month, you've got things that are shocking. I just thought this one was interesting. But I've got lots of those pictures. And not just the general sexism, but also there is quite a lot of potential for women's skills to be better used across the economy. So it's not just a question of women, it's a question of all of us in terms of economy. So although we have a gender pay gap that is really low, as I said, it's still a gender pay gap. Why do we have a gender pay gap? In fact, when we're looking at the gender pay gap, we're looking at it in terms of full-time employment, but when we're looking at the hourly rate of men and women, we see quite a large gender pay gap in this area. In terms of the work segregation, we have a lot of women in area of works that are really low pay and part-time or precarious type of working environment. So it's not all fabulous in that sense. The majority, in terms, so that's, oh yeah, and also, sorry, still about employment. The employment of women when they have children that are not yet at school, so preschool employment rate for women is really low in New Zealand. That is one of the lowest of the OECD country. So when children are at school, women are working. Before that, women are not working because childcare is so expensive. That's basically the explanation. And the level of part-time employment is very high, 35% for women. So that's in terms of employment, paid employment. Now, in terms of unpaid work, domestic task, we have still a majority of the majority of unpaid tasks is still done by women. In fact, in New Zealand, no, I'm going to say something good about men. In New Zealand, men are doing on average 2.5 hours, it's a little bit less, but 2.5 hours of domestic task every day, which is higher than the average of the OECD country, which is less than 2 hours for men. But it's way lower than what women are doing. Women are doing on average about 5 hours of work every day. It's calculated in minutes, so I've translated all that in hours because I can't think in minutes. What else do we have here? We have, yes, and again, what I'm talking about is not necessarily applicable to Maori and Pacific group, where you have higher fertility rate with lower employment rate. So this is actually not what I was explaining earlier on, that those two things go together. And you still have quite a low representation of women in high-paid jobs. So a very low representation of women in corporate boards in the biggest company. So that's quite terrible, actually. Why do we care? Why should we care? Well, the issue of work-life reconciliation, work-life balance is not anymore a female issue. It's not about women. Most governments have it on their table as a very important topic. It's about achieving greater economic independence for women, but it's also about contributing to the productivity and the economic growth of every country. So women have been identified as the group that should be activated into work and should get into work. So this is something that is happening everywhere. And so parental leave, affordable quality childcare, flexible working arrangement, tax transfer system, those sorts of things are key driver for women to participate into employment. There are major demographic issues with the aging population, lowering of fertility rates in most countries, and that means that there are questions over who's going to look after the elderly, who is doing the care that women used to do before for free. Women that are working are also guaranteeing their independence now in working time, but also in older time, in older age. So if you're looking at the gender pay gap for full-time in their working age, it's 10%. But if you're looking later down in life, in old age, the gender pay gap is about 50 to 70%. So it's really quite a big gap there. So it's quite important. And because women are still looking after the children, for them, having a job and having paid employment leads to less poverty for children. So we have those kind of links, and those indicators are, of course, very important for the UN and the OECD, and we know that New Zealand wants to score high on those levels. So this is all linked to the well-being of the individual, but I also believe this is all linked to good democracy, where people have choices. They have the choice, women might have the choice to work and participate in paid employment, and also or to look after their children or other people that they need to care for or want to care for. But also for men, the choice to be able to do work, paid work, but also to be able to be involved with their children, to allow fathers to maybe develop those relationships with their children is, I think, part of the democratic principle that I'm looking at. And ultimately, it makes economic sense, but the reason is not always part of, our decisions, but it makes economic sense. We don't want to have any human capital loss. Of course, people have invested into this, into their education, and so it's really silly at the end of the day if women end up being at home doing not capitalizing on their investment. And also, men could be fabulous carer. We don't know. So anyway, so we don't know because we don't give them that choice. So there you go. Anyway, I'm going to go into a boring set now. I'm just going to talk about this reconciliation concept. This is what I believe reconciliation is about, and to some extent work-life balance too. Reconciliation is about the combination of three types of legislation. I have mentioned I'm a lawyer. So I'm sorry, this is, yes, I have to do a little bit of the legal bit. So it's about three sorts of concepts. The leave provision are provision to grant time off to parents in order for them to spend time with their children. So we have maternity, paternity, parental leave, leave for family reasons, these sorts of things. And the time provision are provision which provide, which alter the working pattern in order for people to be able to care while they're working. So we have part-time work, fixed term, teleworking, flexible working time, these sorts of things. Those two are employment law provisions. So it's about regulating the employer's behavior and the relationship between the employer and the employee. And it's about enabling the worker to care while the worker is working. So it's about making the work manageable so that the worker can also care. Now the last the last strategy, the last provisions, it's about care. So those are about providing care while the carer is at work. We're talking about childcare provision and elderly care provision. Those are social welfare sorts of provisions. So they're not employment provision. And they're about enabling people who have care responsibility to enter work and stay at work. So it's a different kind of way of looking at it. This is about commodification of care. So this is something, this is the care that I'm talking about is the care that have been provided for free by women for all time. And it's being commodified, a price is being put on it so that those who are doing the care can then go to work. But clearly, not all the care can be commodified. Not all the care can be done by someone else. I mean, children still need to be with their parents, I think. There are some society where they don't, and in some ways it's kind of good. Didn't say that. Anyway, my theory is that all this needs to work together. All this provision needs to be well developed together. In New Zealand, we have some really good leave provision. We've got some decent time provision. We've got some really rubbish care provision. And it's kind of okay for childcare, but it's really, really bad for adult care. But that's relatively consistent in most developed countries. So what are we talking about when we're talking about work-life balance in New Zealand? The New Zealand Labour Department is talking about is defining or explaining work-life balance as being about effectively managing the juggling between paid work and other activities that are important to people. It's not about saying that work is wrong or bad, but that work shouldn't completely crowd out all the other activities that matter to people, like time with family, participation in community activity, voluntary work, personal development, leisure and recreation. So basically the Labour it's not the Labour government, the Labour Department, the Department of Labour is saying that work-life balance is about managing three sorts of area of life: paid work, unpaid work, personal time. So paid work, we know what it is, more or less. I mean, it's a little bit more difficult when people are doing work in the farm, or they might be a spouse, a partner to somebody who's working in a farm, they might still work with it. It might be a little bit difficult when it's self-employment and somebody's participating in, in somebody else's work activity. Okay, but more or less we know what paid work is. Now, unpaid work and personal time. Unpaid work is defined as home duties, activities that are orientated and not purely leisure. And personal time is not defined. So, unpaid work, it's basically work, but that's not paid. And I used this example the other day. I said, okay, I think we can agree that doing the laundry is unpaid work. And a mother was like, no, I'm sorry, this is like leisure time for me. I'm away, I'm in the laundry room, no one is talking to me, I love it. So, but okay, like I think, hoovering, like no, that's unpaid work. Ironing, I don't do that. But anyway, like those who do that, that's unpaid work. I think the laundry is unpaid work too. So we kind of like know what that is. But the boundary between personal time and unpaid work can be sometimes a little bit difficult to know. So I've got this great shopping experience there. So if you're going grocery shopping, you're doing the weekly grocery shopping in the supermarket with your kids. I don't know why you would take the two parents and the two kids. Like, I mean, this is just bad. But anyway, if you're going grocery shopping in Countdown or one of those supermarkets, would that be unpaid work? If you're going, look at them, they're so happy, you're going to a farmer's market, that might be family time, that might be personal time. You're eating at the table with your children. They're on their twos, you've got to feed them, and they're spitting out everything. Is that unpaid work, or is that family time? You're looking after the kids in the swimming club, or you're doing the PTA. Is that unpaid work? What is it? You're going to visit your grandmother or an elderly relative or a disabled friend. Is that unpaid work? It's kind of difficult to know the boundary between those things. The underlying motivation for New Zealand and work-life balance is also kind of different to what I have been accustomed to before I came to New Zealand. So before I came to New Zealand, in the EU, in the European Union, work-life reconciliation is about gender equality. It's only about gender equality. In New Zealand, the Department of Labour tells us, this is explicit, work-life balance is not about gender equality or family health. What is this? How can it be? I don't understand. But then I went to work in Singapore and they said they wanted me to talk to them about work-life balance, but not about gender equality, but about fertility rate. So I thought, this is clearly not something unique to New Zealand, even though I've put that it's a unique motivation to New Zealand. What is the motivation for work-life balance in New Zealand? It's about the retention and the attraction of skilled workers. It's about immigration to New Zealand. We want to attract interesting people with great skills to New Zealand, and so therefore we're advertising New Zealand as a work-life balance country. And it's about the contribution to sustainable workplace management. This is basically the green policy of New Zealand. It's about managing climate change where people can go to work not all at the same time, and so therefore they're not all on the road at the same time doing lots of green emission. And so this means that as a result, the main concept of work-life balance in New Zealand is focused on flexibility. So a lot of it is focused on flexibility. And this shapes the legislation. So the time provision, the Employment Relation Flexible Working Arrangement 2007 is the flagship legislation in New Zealand on work-life balance. This is the right to request flexible working arrangement for people who care. We also have some leave provision, the Paid Parental Leave Protection Act 1987 and the right to request break for breastfeeding, and we also have some care provision. So I'm going to bore you a little bit and go through the various legislation. The parental leave provision, I should have started with the flagship, but you know, I think you start with the birth probably, so I'll start there. And I'm going to spare you all the detail, but in New Zealand, you are entitled to 14 weeks government-funded, job-protected paid maternity leave as a mother, if you are eligible for it, and you have to at least work for 6 months under certain conditions or 12 months in order to qualify for it. You're also entitled to 10 days antenatal care and up to a year of unpaid leave. This is really good. This was really good until Australia 2 years ago adopted legislation that, so New Zealand was scoring really high, and then Australia adopted legislation to give 18 weeks at much higher pay rates than New Zealand. So New Zealand went down the table. So as a result, in 2014, at the beginning of this year, in the budget, the government changed the, started some changes to the parental leave and provided that from the 1st of April 2015, we'll have 16 weeks, and from the 1st of April 2016, so 15, so next year, and then 16, there'll be 18 weeks, and there'll be more people entitled to pay. Now, the pay is really bad. The pay is really low. It's lower than the minimum wage. The minimum wage for 40 hours a week is $570, and the maximum parental leave, maternity leave you can get is $504.10 before tax. So you've got to pay tax on that. And really what's interesting is that the legislation is provided in gender-neutral terms, but what's interesting is that fathers can only benefit from their rights to parental leave if the mother qualifies for it, or at least the rights to the paid parental leave if the mother qualified for it. So same thing, but the father has to also qualify for it. So same eligibility, working 6 months or 12 months, looking at the various eligibility. 2 weeks, 1 or 2 weeks unpaid paternity leave, and then the mother can transfer the maternity leave to the father, the paid maternity leave to the father, if the mother qualifies for it, and the father qualifies for it. So the rights belongs to the mother to start with. So that's really quite strange. And then also the mother can transfer the year unpaid parental leave or part of the year unpaid parental leave to the father if the mother qualified for it and if the father qualified for it. Anyway, it's a little bit complicated, but the payment, so the part of the paid parental leave, is made by the government, not by the employer. So I argue that this is very strange, and I think that employers that are not participating in this reproductive act, I'm not saying they should be actively, they should be paying for it, they should be part of it. They are not then disconnected from the act of reproduction. And then I argue that there is a disconnection between the production and the reproduction in New Zealand, that employers are almost set aside to the action of society. They are participating in the market, but they're not participating in society because they're not engaged in the payment. And this is a little bit strange. In most countries, employers somehow pay a little bit of the parental leave. And also the other thing is only those that are in stable employment, so those who are the most privileged in employment can benefit from those provisions, because you need to be at least in employment for 6 months or 12 months. So it means you have to be in employment over a continuous period, and a lot of people who are in precarious work cannot benefit from this. The breastfeeding breaks, this is an interesting provision because in New Zealand, it doesn't exist in lots of places. In New Zealand, you have the right to request the breaks. They're not, those breaks are not paid. The employer has the right to refuse it, but must have a good reason for it. The legislation is intended to contribute to the international obligation on, good health for the children, but there are some obvious practicability. So as I said, as I showed on the picture, it's okay when you have your own office and you have access to your child, like you take your child to work, what do you do? So on campus here, for example, when I had my child, we have a creche on campus, so I could go walk to the creche, and that's all lovely, it's all fine. But what do you do if you're working in retail or it's not that practical, actually. And for some employer, it's not that practical. Flexible working arrangement. This is really interesting. So this is the flagship New Zealand legislation. It's originally copied from a UK legislation that was looking at providing flexible working arrangement for parents who had care obligation. But in New Zealand, it's been significantly extended to all sorts of care, so not just childcare, but anyone who cares. And that's been really a model for a lot of other countries. So it's been referred to in a lot of countries. Now, this legislation was under review last year and went through the Parliament, and it went through the second reading in Parliament on the 19th of March 2014, and then it just went. So we don't know what's going to happen to it. At the moment, this is the legislation. So you have the right, people have the right to request. At the moment, you have to request in writing, and the employer, and you have to explain how the flexibility, or what kind of flexibility you're asking for, and how this is going to help for caring for whoever you're caring for. There are a restriction on how many times you can request, so you can request only once a year, and the employer has to consider it seriously and has to answer you within 3 months. Now, we all had that in our contract of employment. You always have the right to, go to your employer and ask for flexible working arrangement, but it puts this idea of care at the forefront of what is important for people. So it's been interesting. However, flexibility has been a bit of a difficult issue, and we've seen in lots of countries now with the crisis, the global financial crisis and the general crisis, we've seen that flexibility has been a little bit taken, very much taken over by a lot of employers and saying, oh, flexibility is really good for everyone. You're going to work flexibly now. We're going to take away your desk. You're going to work from home. So those are the kind of things that are, flexibility is a bit of a difficult tool, and it's not always the greatest tool to look at work-life conflict. It has also some impact on gender, and it impacts gender differently. So if irregularity and unpredictability of working hours is bad for everyone, we've seen that when being autonomous in relation to choosing one's hour, we've seen that women have chosen to work less. So women in majority choose to work less, to use flexibility to work less in the market in order to care for their children or other people. Whereas men have used flexibility in order to work more, to work on the weekend, to work at night. So it's been interesting to see how flexibility has been very gendered and in fact has reinforced gender segregated labor market structures. So it's been interesting. And it fits within the model in New Zealand, I think. Quickly, working for family package, this is basically a package that has been put together in 2004, and this is the care side, if you want. It provides help for people who work. You have to work in order to benefit from it, but you have to work not too much, or not earn too much, because the threshold for receiving the benefit is linked to, a certain level. So it kind of encourages, it's a bit weird, because it kind of encourages the 1.5 earning family or the 1.0 family. So the kind of like fathers that go to work and the mother that stays at home. So it encourages kind of like traditional gender role within the family. And it's quite interesting, because at the same time, for single mothers, they still have to go to work in order to benefit from this, from the family package, for the working for family package. So on the one hand, it's very old-fashioned. On the one hand, people who are in couple, so let's say for sake of simplicity, people who are married, they're encouraged to have traditionally the man going to work and the woman staying at home. It doesn't have to be like that, but that's effectively what's happening. And for single parents, whom are mostly women, they have to go to work. And if they choose to stay at home, they're viewed as, useless and not contributing to society and doing nothing. So it's kind of interesting how this legislation has worked from a gender perspective. So all this legislation, what does it say? What are the implications for mother? What can mother reconcile work with family life in New Zealand? Well, as I said, all of those legislation have somehow contributed to reinforce the trend, the traditional gender role within the families. So it's kind of interesting that on the one hand we have quite well-developed legislation. On the other hand, they're kind of leading us to traditional role. We also find that, like everywhere, in Australia they've just released a report, and I've done a report 2 years ago for the European Union. Like everywhere, there is a huge gap between the law that is really well developed, and the practice. There is a huge amount of discrimination against people with young children, especially mothers. So we have this really huge gap. What we see is that there is still a lot of influence on gender stereotype, cultural gender stereotype. Women are seen still as the primary carer for children, and only employees as, something, as an alternative, as a second set type of thing. In terms of how it works in small and large enterprise, small enterprise are more likely to discriminate against parents than larger enterprise. There is less good governance. There is less transparency in small enterprise. There is also this trend that gives small enterprise the right to not to not apply all of the legislation. A lot of small enterprises are exempted from some of the legislation. So it feels like small companies always feel like, oh, they don't have to implement gender equality laws. It's not that interesting. It's not that important. It costs a lot of money, and therefore they shouldn't be participating to that. The public sector is generally viewed as the sector that manages women and pregnancy and maternity, and that's the same in New Zealand. And health and safety is used a lot in order to control women or to let women go home, send women home. So that's kind of a trend we find everywhere. Where do we go from there? What do we do? Well, here is my pig. I love my pig. Every year I'm putting my pigs up. It's still valuable, more valued in New Zealand, and not just in New Zealand, to raise pigs or cows or sheep than it is to raise children. This is mostly because raising children, or the care in general, is not accounted in traditional accounting. And we haven't found a way to really put it in traditional accounting, whereas raising animals is part of it. We've got two visions. So on one hand, employers are often saying to me or to everyone, we need less rights. All these rights, they're creating discrimination. Because we have all these rights, it's too expensive, and therefore they are discrimination. And then the employees are saying, well, actually, we need more rights to participate, to be able to participate in employment. Along my research, I've not found that it is because we have the rights that there is discrimination. It's not, indeed, if we had less rights, it doesn't mean that we would have less discrimination. What I have found is that some rights are important, they're statements, but they are not necessarily followed. And then there is a gap, what to do, what is the role of the law? I found it quite depressing and quite, yes, quite depressing. So the role of law is quite limited. There is a big role for education. So hence going to university, hopefully it's helpful for us. But also there is a role for companies, and some large companies I've worked with are quite interesting in the sense that they want to develop more diversity, but I'm not so sure about their motivation. I'm not sure it's very altruistic. And we need to revisit this concept of the market. The market that, it's pictured to us as a thing of nature, a thing of physics. There is nothing above the market, not science. The market is above science. We see it. The market is above climate change. So the market is above human rights, above gender equality. Is that the kind of market we want to be in? Do we have a choice about what kind of market we want to be in? But I think we do have a choice. It's about this idea of autonomy. So we value autonomy in this market. And so the most autonomous we are, the better player we are on the market. However, all of us, we have been dependent at some point on care of somebody else. We've all been babies. And then with the aging population, there is more chance that we will need more care in old age. So we are dependent on care. And none of us are immune to illness or accident. So that could happen. But more importantly, those that are the most autonomous on the market, those people that are completely autonomous, they in fact rely on so many people to do the care for them. And that care can be either a wife, often it is a wife, but also more and more it is a care that is now imported from other countries, from poorer countries. So it has huge impact on not only the gender equality, but also the global organization of people. Yes, and I haven't talked about production and reproduction. I suppose, well, we need to to at some point discuss this concept of production and reproduction and how we can reconcile those two terms. It's a question of accountancy, and I'm in an accountancy department, so I should do better than that. But it's about accounting for reproduction, and so far we've not been doing really well at accounting for reproduction. But anyway, that's about my talk. So thank you for listening, and if you have any question, I think we have about 10-15 minutes.